The first real storm of the season drops wet snow hard enough to stop a westbound freight. Within days, drifts along the grade stand higher than a man, and the timetable that used to bring flour, coal, and kerosene in 3-day intervals stretches to weeks. Most cabins on the prairie are lit the same way. A single flat-wick lamp on the center of the table burning about an ounce of kerosene an hour, just to keep the circle of light wide enough to read by. In better years, families simply bought another gallon. In an interruption year, every extra hour of flame trades directly against food, freight, or hardware. A handful of farm kitchens and trackside rooms have done something different. They've lifted the lamp off the table, backed it with bright tin, and hooded it. Same burner, same wick, less fuel, more work. The arithmetic will decide whose kerosene lasts until the trains move again. A storekeeper in a rail town along the Sioux City and Pembina line scrapes frozen mud off a kerosene barrelhead before knocking in the bung with a hatchet to fill a customer's dented can. The liquid pours slowly in the cold, thick as honey, and the customer counts out coins carefully, 15 cents for a gallon that will keep his table lamp burning for about 30 evenings at moderate use. This transaction, repeated thousands of times across the Great Plains in the 1870s and 1880s, represented a fundamental shift in frontier life. Refined kerosene had undercut whale oil and tallow in the mid-19th century, becoming the standard lamp fuel by the 1870s. The technology was celebrated as cheap modern light, nearly limitless compared to candles. The reality was more complicated. Farm Journal budget examples from the period list lamp oil alongside flour, coffee, and nails as recurring monthly expenses. A Norwegian homesteader from a township near the Red River might spend 25 to 35 cents per month on kerosene in winter, a modest sum in a good year, but in a household where total cash income might run $8 to $12 monthly during the cold season, lighting consumed a measurable fraction of the budget. Hardware circulars from the period advertised coal oil by the barrel, with price per gallon clearly marked. Wholesale prices at refineries in the East ran around 8 to 10 cents per gallon. By the time freight, markup, and handling were added, rural retail costs settled between 15 and 25 cents per gallon across the upper Midwest and northern plains. The common lamp types found in frontier homes were simple devices. Flat-wick table lamps with font capacities of 1 pint to 1 quart dominated household inventories. Wick widths ran 5/8 inch to 1 inch. Barn lanterns used similar burners, but with protective glass globes and carrying handles. All operated on the same principle. A cotton wick drew kerosene from the reservoir through capillary action, and the flame consumed the fuel at a rate determined by wick width, trim, and air supply. Consumption patterns were predictable. A well-trimmed flat-wick lamp with a 3/4 inch wick burned approximately 0.8 to 1 fluid ounce of kerosene per hour at a comfortable reading brightness. 5 hours of nightly use, from supper through evening chores, reading, and mending, consumed roughly 4 to 5 fluid ounces, or about 1 2/10 to 1.5 gallons per month for a single lamp. Most frontier households ran more than one lamp. A main table lamp provided light for shared tasks and reading. A second smaller lamp might be lit for kitchen work or bedroom use. Occasional lantern trips to the barn or root cellar added incremental consumption. Total monthly kerosene use for a typical family ranged from 2 to 3 gallons during winter months when daylight hours were short and indoor work extended into evening. The arithmetic seemed manageable until it wasn't. Every added lamp, every just turn it up a bit to brighten the circle, multiplied cost. One household using 3 gallons monthly at 20 cents per gallon spent 60 cents on lighting alone. In a normal year, that expense was a nuisance, budgeted and paid. In an interruption year, when trains stopped running, when freight was delayed by weather or track failure, when supply ran short and prices spiked, those 3 gallons became the difference between enough and out. The consequence of running out was not mere inconvenience. Without lamplight, evening work ceased. Mending harnesses by firelight strained the eyes and produced poor repairs. Reading was nearly impossible. Account books went unbalanced. Children's lessons stopped. The productive hours between supper and sleep, the margin where frontier families caught up on the endless demands of farm and household, vanished into darkness. On the page, an extra hour of light looked trivial. In a winter with no train, those hours added up to barrels nobody could replace. A frost-rimmed window in a one-room claim, shanty marks the only clear glass in a wall, otherwise built of rough planks and tar paper. Inside, the layout follows a pattern repeated across thousands of homesteads in Nebraska and Dakota Territory during the late 1870s. Central table, cast-iron stove, bed or bunks against the far wall, small pantry partition if the claim had been proved up and improved, single exterior door with a curtain to block drafts. The prevailing assumption was straightforward. Illumination depended on fuel and burner. If the room was dim, you turned up the wick, lit a second lamp, or made do. The room itself, its dimensions, wall finishes, and the position of the light source was treated as fixed background, not as an element of the lighting system. A typical homestead inventory from the period lists one decent flat-wick table lamp as the primary source. One or two lanterns served for outdoor work and barn trips. Candles appeared occasionally, reserved for emergencies or when oil ran low. Simple wall brackets existed in hardware catalogs, but most frontier homes lacked them. Mounting a lamp on the wall required forethought, materials, and time that competing demands rarely allowed. Wall and ceiling finishes varied widely. Bare boards were common in new construction. Whitewash appeared in more established homes, applied to brighten interiors and reduce the appearance of grime. Newspaper was pasted between studs as draft insulation in the coldest regions. Each surface absorbed or scattered light differently. Bare wood soaked up illumination. Whitewash reflected it modestly. Tar paper and newsprint absorbed nearly everything. The geometry was simple but consequential. A lamp placed at the center of a table sent light in all directions more or less equally. The brightest zone formed a circle with radius of perhaps 18 to 24 inches, adequate for the person seated directly beside the lamp, barely sufficient for someone across the table, and insufficient for anyone working at the edges of the room or in the dim band between table and walls. Low mounting height compounded the problem. A lamp sitting on a 30-inch high table placed the flame at roughly 3 feet above the floor. At that height, the cone of useful light struck the work surface at a steep angle, creating strong shadows from hands, tools, and materials. Anyone seated close to the lamp blocked light from reaching others. The distribution was inefficient by geometry alone, regardless of how much fuel burned. Memoir passages from the period note this limitation repeatedly. A settler's account might describe the one lamp on the table as the defining feature of evening routine. Travel reports and inspection accounts remarked on the dimness of frontier interiors, often attributing it to fuel economy without recognizing the role of geometry. Households coped with simple strategies. Tasks requiring close attention, mending harnesses, sewing torn clothing, reading, balancing account books, were crowded into the brightest spot directly beside the lamp. Work requiring less precision was pushed to the edges or delayed until daylight. Fine tasks were often abandoned entirely once the lamp was turned down to save oil. The unspoken trade-off was clear. Families could work longer hours and burn more kerosene, or they could reduce hours and preserve fuel. The room's layout, the lamp's position, and the surfaces surrounding the light were constants, accepted as unchangeable. Adjusting consumption meant adjusting behavior. Most families treated the room as fixed and the lamp as variable. A few would reverse that assumption and change their numbers without buying a new burner. Soot streaks mark the joists directly above the table in a Dakota Territory claim shack. a clear cone of carbon staining the wood after years of over-trimmed flames and incomplete combustion. The pattern is diagnostic. Too much. Wick exposed without adequate air produces smoke, deposits carbon, and wastes fuel without proportional increase in visible light. The prevailing myth held that turning the wick down always equaled savings, regardless of smoke, odor, or reduced task visibility. Homesteaders operating under tight budgets often ran lamps at minimal settings, believing they were stretching fuel. The outcome was more complex. Underburned lamps smoked, created soot, and might not reduce consumption as much as users assumed. Basic lamp physics complicated the arithmetic. Only a fraction of the energy released by burning kerosene became visible light. Most left as heat. Luminous efficacy, the ratio of visible light output to fuel consumed, was low in all oil lamps of the period, but particularly poor in badly adjusted burners. Flat-wick lamps required proper airflow to sustain complete combustion. The wick drew fuel upward through capillary action. Air entered from below through slots in the burner collar and mixed with kerosene vapor in the flame zone. When properly adjusted, the flame burned bright blue at the base with a yellow-white cone above, hot, clean, and producing maximum light per unit of fuel. When under-adjusted, the flame turned orange, flickered, and produced visible smoke. Incomplete combustion released less total energy and converted an even smaller fraction into useful illumination. The lamp still consumed fuel, but delivered diminished light. Users trying to save kerosene by dimming often gained little real economy while losing most of their working brightness. The distribution of light from a bare lamp compounded the inefficiency. A flame radiates more or less spherically. Significant portions of the light left upward toward the ceiling, sideways into walls, and backward away from the work area. Only the fraction aimed generally downward and forward contributed to task illumination at table height. Illumination intensity falls off with distance according to the inverse square law. At twice the distance, brightness drops to 1/4. At 3 times the distance, it falls to 1/9. A lamp that provided adequate light for close work might be nearly useless at the far edge of a table only 30 inches away. A farm woman mending harness leather at the outer ring of the lamp's light worked in perpetual dimness. A blacksmith reading a seed circular at the edge of a low table flame squinted and strained. Both consumed fuel without receiving adequate return because the geometry wasted most of what the flame produced. 19th century lamp manuals warned against these problems explicitly. Instructions recommended bright backgrounds, whitewashed walls, or polished reflectors to reclaim light that would otherwise be absorbed. They cautioned against low, smoking flames and advised users to maintain bright, clean combustion even if it appeared to consume more oil, because the increase in useful light more than compensated. Health complaints from the period document The Human Cost. Diary entries mention headaches, tired eyes, and difficulty with fine work after hours spent under dim or smoking lamps. The limitation was biological as much as economic. Poor light reduced productivity, increased errors, and shortened the effective working window each evening. The core problem was clear to anyone who studied the issue carefully. The limitation was not the gallon in the font, but how much of its light landed on the work. On the frontier, few people had time to think in those terms, until the train stopped. A depot waiting room at dusk, 2 wall-mounted bracket lamps throwing bright ovals of light over ticket window and timetable, reveals the geometry already solved in commercial and transport settings. Each lamp hangs from a cast-iron arm projecting 8 to 10 inches from the wall, placing the burner 18 to 24 inches out from the vertical surface. Behind each lamp, a curved tin reflector 12 inches in diameter captures light that would have struck the wall and redirects it forward into the room. The contrast between frontier cabins and engineered interiors was stark. In railroad depots, river steamers, and town parlors across the Midwest from the 1860s through the 1880s, lighting had been treated as an engineering problem, not merely a fuel problem. These spaces needed reliable illumination over counters, timetables, and clocks. Inadequate light meant missed trains, billing errors, and accidents. Commercial bracket lamps were cataloged items with defined specifications. Arm lengths ran 6 to 12 inches, depending on reflector size and intended coverage. Reflector diameters ranged from 7 to 11 inches for typical interior applications. Shapes varied from flat to parabolic curves, with deeper curves providing more directional throw. Finishes included enamel for decorative parlor fixtures and tinned or polished sheet metal for utilitarian depot and workshop installations. Mounting heights followed practical rules derived from field use. Catalogs specified 5 to 6 feet above floor level as standard for wall lamps in rooms with 8-foot ceilings. This placed the flame roughly at head height for a standing person and well above the sight line for someone seated, reducing glare while maximizing downward and forward light distribution. Shades and hoods appeared frequently. A simple conical shade of tin or enamel-painted metal limited upward light, reducing ceiling smoke and wasted illumination. Hoods projected forward and downward, creating a directional beam. The combination of reflector and hood transformed a spherical light source into an approximately hemispherical or conical one, concentrating output where it was needed. The physics were straightforward. A polished or painted reflector with reflectance of 50 to 70% captured roughly half the light, leaving the back of the lamp, and redirected it forward. This boosted forward intensity by 25 to 50% without burning additional fuel. A well-designed curved reflector could focus light even more effectively, creating a bright central zone for precision tasks. Manufacturers understood the value. Catalog descriptions promised strong light forward with no increase in oil consumption, or excellent for reading tables and counters, economical in fuel use. These were not empty claims. Depots and commercial spaces had strong incentive to reduce operating costs, and proven hardware became standard equipment. A railroad telegrapher whose office lamp hung at head height, backed by tin, worked in bright, even light from dusk until late shift. A boarding house keeper with factory-made sconces in the dining room lit 6 tables adequately with 4 lamps that would have struggled to cover 2 tables if placed at table height without reflectors. The knowledge existed. The hardware existed. The techniques were proven in thousands of installations across settled areas. But the translation from built commercial environments to improvised homestead construction was incomplete. Purchasing factory brackets required cash many frontier families lacked. Freight added cost and delay. Installation required secure walls, often absent in claim shanties built of rough boards and tar paper. The gap was not between knowing and not knowing. The gap was between built-in infrastructure and field improvisation. On the depot wall, reflectors were part of the hardware. In the shanties beyond the tracks, they would have to be invented out of scrap. A rough plain board, 8 inches wide and 24 inches long, is held against a log wall while someone marks stud locations with a square spike. The board came from offcuts left over from floor repairs. The spike came from a hardware barrel. The labor came from an evening after chores. Together, they represent the path by which bracket logic reached prairie cabins. The process began with observation. A homesteader from Halleck Township might see the wall lamps in a depot waiting room during a supply trip, or notice the bracket fixtures in a merchant's office while settling an account. The form was simple enough. A horizontal shelf projecting from the wall, a backplate behind the lamp, sometimes a hood above. No mystery, just applied geometry. The constraint was economic. Factory brackets cost dollars and required freight. Many frontier families could not afford manufactured fixtures even when they understood the principle. But scrap wood was abundant. Used kerosene cans could be flattened. Stovepipe sections were salvageable after chimney repairs. The same geometry that worked in enameled hardware could be replicated in salvaged materials. Farm paper household hints, columns from the period occasionally described simple lamp shelves. A sketch might show a board projecting from a wall with a can lid tacked behind the lamp as a reflector. Instructions were minimal. Fix a shelf for the lamp and back it with bright metal. You will be surprised at the improvement. The build required basic carpentry. The shelf board needed to be reasonably level to prevent the lamp from tipping. 20 to 30 inches length provided adequate support and working area. 8 to 10 inches depth allowed the lamp to sit securely with clearance behind for the backplate. The board was planed smooth on the top surface to prevent snags and provide stable footing for the lamp base. Attachment to the wall required finding solid framing. In log construction, the logs themselves provided support. In board and batten shanties, the builder had to locate studs, typically spaced 16 or 24 inches apart, and drive spikes or lag screws into solid wood. A poorly mounted shelf could pull free under the lamp's weight, especially when the font was full. The backplate came from whatever sheet metal was available. Flattened kerosene cans were common. A typical 5-gallon square can, cut and flattened, yielded a piece roughly 14 to 18 inches tall and slightly wider. The metal was thin but adequate. Larger pieces could be made from stovepipe sections split lengthwise and flattened with a mallet. The backplate was positioned to extend above the lamp chimney and wider than the lamp body. This captured light, leaving backward and sideways from the flame. The plate didn't need to be curved. A flat surface provided measurable benefit. If the builder had time and skill, a gentle curve could be hammered into the plate by forming it over a log or barrel, increasing reflective efficiency. A hood, if added, came from similar materials. A section of stovepipe cut to 6 or 8 inches length, mounted above and slightly forward of the lamp, projected a cone of light downward and forward while limiting upward waste. The hood needed ventilation slots or open ends to prevent heat buildup and allow combustion gases to rise. Mounting height mattered more than any other variable. Setting the shelf so that the lamp chimney center sat 5.5 to 6 feet above the floor, roughly 66 to 72 inches, positioned the flame 18 to 24 inches above a seated person's eye level. This reduced glare, eliminated hand shadows on the work, and placed the brightest part of the light cone directly over the table. Wall finish influenced performance. Whitewashed walls scattered light more effectively than bare wood, adding secondary reflections. But even dark walls benefited from the primary reflector behind the lamp. No new burner, no new oil, only a board and a plate. But the pattern of light in the room changed completely. Chalk arcs drawn on a tabletop mark where fine print can be read without strain under different lamp positions. The curves record an experiment conducted not with instruments but with practical tasks: reading newsprint, threading needles, copying account figures. Each arc represents the threshold beyond which the work becomes difficult, the point where eyes begin to tire. The intuitive belief was that light filled a room, that a bright lamp simply made everything brighter by some general amount. The measurable reality was more complex. Task brightness fell off quickly with distance and angle from the source. A lamp adequate for one person reading beside it might provide marginal light for someone seated across a 30-inch table. The inverse square law governed the decline. At twice the distance from the source, illuminance dropped to 1/4 the original value. At 3 times the distance, it fell to 1/9. A table lamp providing strong light at 12 inches gave only 1/4 that brightness at 24 inches and 1/9 at 36 inches. Angle mattered as well. Light arriving perpendicular to the work surface was most efficient. Light striking at shallow angles, as occurred when a low lamp sent rays across a tabletop, spread out and lost intensity. A raised lamp, by contrast, sent light downward at steeper angles, concentrating brightness over the work area. A farm wife comparing stitch visibility at the table center versus the far edge could feel the difference immediately. Close to the table lamp, she could see dark thread against dark fabric clearly. At the opposite edge, only 40 inches away, the same work became guesswork. Moving the work closer helped temporarily, but crowded the table and limited how many people could share the light. Raising the lamp changed the geometry fundamentally. When mounted on a shelf at 60 to 66 inches height, the lamp was positioned 48 to 54 inches above a standard 30-inch table. At that height, the light fell more steeply onto the table surface, reducing shadows and increasing uniformity. Adding a reflector altered distribution even more dramatically. Approximately 40 to 50% of light leaving the back and sides of a bare lamp struck the wall and was absorbed or scattered weakly. A reflector captured much of this light and redirected it forward. The result was not a doubling of total luminous output, the fuel burn rate remained constant, but a redistribution that increased forward intensity by 30 to 50%. The combination of elevation and reflection expanded the usable work area significantly. A bare table lamp might provide adequate light, sufficient for reading small type without strain, within a radius of 16 to 20 inches. The same lamp, elevated and reflected, extended that radius to 24 to 30 inches or more in the forward direction. For a rectangular table 40 inches by 60 inches, a common size in frontier homes, this expansion was transformative. A table lamp lit the center well, but left the ends and far side dim. A shelf-mounted reflected lamp covered 3/4 of the table surface adequately, allowing multiple people to work simultaneously without crowding. Contemporary domestic manuals, where they addressed lighting at all, recommended placing lamps above and behind the worker to avoid eye strain and shadows. The advice was sound, derived from long practice in workshops and studies where consistent light was necessary. But translating written advice to built practice required tools, materials, and time. A telegrapher accustomed to high-mounted office lamps, working temporarily under a low kitchen lamp, noticed the difference immediately. More squinting, hand shadows obscuring the work, fatigue setting in earlier. The lamp itself hadn't changed. The position had. Total luminous flux from the burner remained essentially constant. The fuel burned at the same rate. The wick saw the same airflow. What changed was where the light went and how much of it reached the task surface at usable intensity. To anyone watching casually, the lamp looked unchanged. Measured on the table, it behaved like a more powerful burner. A row of objects laid out along a table, newspaper, Bible, account ledger, needle, and dark thread, each marking a threshold of visibility. These were not scientific instruments, but they served as repeatable gauges for households that lacked photometers and light meters. Brightness could not be measured in foot candles without tools, but it could be assessed through practical tasks: reading, sewing, bookkeeping. The tests were simple and reproducible. Maximum reading distance for small type, such as newspaper classified advertisements or Bible footnotes, marked the outer edge of adequate illumination for close work. Maximum distance for threading a needle established a higher threshold, the finest precision task common in frontier households. Error rates when copying column totals from daylight work compared to lamplight work revealed whether evening conditions introduced mistakes. A farm woman timing how long she could sew before her eyes ached under different setups generated a practical metric: work duration before fatigue. Longer duration without strain indicated better lighting. A shopkeeper comparing how far from the wall he could read labels when the lamp was moved measured the expansion of usable space. The comparisons focused on 3 configurations, all using the same lamp at the same wick setting. First, the baseline, lamp on table at standard height. Second, the simple shelf, lamp elevated to 60 inches above floor on a board with a flat tin backplate. Third, the hooded version, lamp on shelf with backplate and a forward projecting hood. Results were consistent across multiple locations and users. The baseline table lamp provided strong light within 16 to 20 inches radius, marginal light to 30 inches, and insufficient light beyond that distance. Small type reading was comfortable within the close zone, possible with effort in the marginal zone, and impractical in the dim periphery. The shelf with reflector extended the comfortable reading radius forward to approximately 28 to 32 inches. The same small type that required squinting at the table edge became legible with ease when the lamp was elevated and backed. Thread-needle tasks remained difficult at the far edge, but improved significantly in the middle distance. Adding the hood refined the distribution further. By limiting upward light loss and creating a more directional pattern, the hood increased forward intensity by an additional 10 to 15%. The comfortable reading zone expanded to 36 inches or slightly more in the preferred direction. The practical meaning was clear. 3 or 4 people could share adequate light around a table with a single shelf-mounted reflected lamp, where the same lamp on the table served only 1 or 2 comfortably. Evening tasks could be spread across the table instead of crowded around the lamp base. Letters from the period occasionally noted improvements in casual language. We can now do more mending in the evenings, or the new lamp shelf makes reading much easier. These phrases translated to measurable improvements in usable light per unit fuel. Conservative estimates suggested 30 to 40% higher task plane illuminance at typical working distances without increased consumption. Off-grid lighting research from modern development contexts provides parallel data. Studies of kerosene lamp use in rural areas without electricity document consumption patterns of 10 to 15 liters per month per household for baseline lighting, with user satisfaction heavily influenced by lamp position and reflector use. Subjective reports of good light correlate strongly with elevated mounting and reflective surfaces. The principle extended beyond reading and sewing. Any precision task benefited: repairing tools, sharpening blades, mixing medicines, inspecting fabric for damage. Each task had a visibility threshold. Geometry determined whether the available light cleared that threshold or fell short. The font still emptied at the same rate. The burner consumed fuel at a steady ounce per hour. The number of clear, usable work hours that font bought had quietly increased. A winter account page headed December through January. Oil, coal, flour, with small cross marks indicating shortages, becomes the central document showing how design translated to dollars. The page lists expenditures in careful columns: amounts bought, prices paid, totals due. Lamp oil appears each month alongside staples. For families keeping strict accounts after previous hard winters, these figures were not abstractions but survival data. The arithmetic began with baseline consumption patterns. A farmer keeping accounts on oil and coal noted typical winter use before any changes. Main lamp 5 hours per night for household tasks. Secondary lamp 2 hours per night for kitchen or bedroom use. Both lamps burned approximately 1 ounce per hour at moderate wick settings. Total nightly consumption approached 7 ounces. Over a 30-day month, this totaled roughly 13 1/4 pints, or 2 9/10 gallons. Adding occasional lantern use for barn checks and outdoor chores pushed monthly totals to 3 gallons or slightly more. At 20 cents per gallon, monthly lighting costs ran 60 cents in winter. Over a 4-month cold season, November through February, the household spent $2.40 on lamp oil alone. This was not a trivial sum. Contemporary household budget samples from farm journals and settlement reports show lighting consuming 3 to 4% of total cash expenditure in working-class and frontier families. $12 spent on lighting over a year competed directly with tool purchases, seed orders, and critical repairs. The design intervention altered the equation without requiring new equipment. A lantern shelf installation, board, backplate, hood, and repositioned lamp cost nothing if built from scrap or perhaps 25 cents if materials were purchased new. Construction time ran 2 to 4 hours, depending on skill and available tools. Once installed, the shelf changed consumption patterns immediately. The main lamp, now raised and reflected, provided equal or better task light at a lower wick setting. Turning the wick down 1 notch, barely visible to the eye, reduced burn rate from 1 ounce per hour to approximately 7/10 to 8/10 ounce per hour. The decrease came from narrower flame width and slightly reduced vaporization rate. The secondary lamp saw reduced hours. Many tasks previously requiring a second light source could now be done under the main shelf lamp due to its expanded coverage. 2 hours nightly secondary use dropped to perhaps 1 hour or less. On some evenings, the second lamp stayed unlit entirely. The new monthly total ran approximately 45 to 55 ounces for the main lamp and 16 to 20 ounces for the secondary, totaling 61 to 75 ounces, or 1 9/10 to 2 3/10 gallons. Call it 2 gallons for practical estimates. The savings appeared modest in single-month terms, 1 gallon per month, worth 20 cents. But across a 4-month winter season, the reduction totaled 4 gallons and 80 cents. That sum bought a box of nails, several pounds of flour, or most of the material needed for a critical repair. More importantly, the reduced consumption extended supply during interruptions. A family that had purchased or freighted a standard winter stock, 12 to 15 gallons for lighting plus additional fuel for cleaning and miscellaneous use, now found that stock lasting significantly longer. What had been adequate for 4 months with tight rationing now carried through 5 months with modest comfort. A storekeeper comparing oil orders from families with different lighting habits noted the pattern in his ledger. Households that had installed shelf lamps or wall brackets ordered barrels less frequently, bought smaller, quantities per trip, and rarely ran short during weather delays. On the books, the difference between 3 gallons and 2 was a few lines of figures. On the ground, it was an avoided trip through drifted roads. A chalk notice on a depot door. No trains through since the 29th. Next movement unknown. The date is early November 1880. The place is Minnesota and Dakota Territory along the main rail corridors. The snow had started in mid-October, earlier than expected, wetter and heavier than recent winters. Within days, the normal rhythm of freight and passenger service began breaking down. A railroad dispatcher in St. Paul, reporting blocked cuts and buried sidings, recorded snow depths that seemed improbable. Drifts along exposed grade sections stood 8 to 12 feet high within the first week. The second storm, following 3 days later, added another layer. By the 3rd week of October, some rail sections were buried under 15 to 20 feet of compacted snow. Meteorological records from the period quantify the severity. The winter of 1880 to 1881, later called the hard winter or long winter, brought snowfall totals 50 to 75% above the previous decade's average across the northern plains. Temperatures remained below 0 Fahrenheit for extended periods, weeks at a time in some locations. Wind speeds during storms regularly exceeded 30 miles per hour, creating drifts that completely obliterated landmarks. Rail companies attempted to clear the lines. Crews with shovels made initial progress, opening short sections. Then the next storm refilled the cuts. Locomotives sent to punch through drifts became stuck, requiring rescue by additional engines that also became trapped. By mid-November, some stretches had 2 or 3 locomotives buried in snow, abandoned until spring thaw. Freight service stopped entirely on many lines. The regular 3-day interval for supply deliveries stretched to a week, then 2 weeks, then ceased. Towns like De Smet and Tracy, dependent on rail for kerosene, flour, coal, and manufactured goods, faced empty shelves and dwindling stocks. Families in homesteads along snowbound lines lived entirely on what was already on hand. Households that kept strict inventories knew their supply margins. A typical winter stock of lamp oil, 12 to 15 gallons, would last 4 months under normal use, 5 months under moderate economy, or 6 months under strict rationing. The trains did not resume in December. They did not resume in January. Some lines remained closed until April. Newspaper accounts from the period described the surreal experience of winter isolation. No mail, no freight, no communication except by the occasional traveler on snowshoes or skis. For lighting, the interruption created a direct test of consumption patterns. Households burning 3 gallons monthly faced exhaustion of their winter stock by late January or early February. Households burning 2 gallons monthly could stretch into March. Those burning 1.5 gallons or less through stringent rationing or efficient design might last until the thaw. Contemporary recollections, including published accounts like The Long Winter, describe weeks with lamps burned low or not at all. Families ate by stovelight, went to bed at dusk, and curtailed all evening activity to preserve oil for emergencies. Strict fuel rationing became a matter of survival, not comfort. By January, many lamps burned low or not at all. Where the oil barrels were still half full, the difference lay in decisions made the previous winter. A family chooses to eat beside an open stove door by firelight, lamp unlit on its wall shelf, wick carefully trimmed but dry. The scene repeats across snowbound homesteads during the worst weeks of the hard winter. 2 strategies emerge, distinguished not by will or character, but by the tools available. Strategy A. Simple rationing. Cut lamp hours ruthlessly. Eliminate evening reading. Postpone mending and bookkeeping. Rely on daylight for all tasks requiring vision. Sleep longer. Work less. Wait. Strategy B. Design assisted rationing. Optimize light geometry to extract maximum task brightness per ounce of fuel, then apply moderate hour cuts. Preserve key evening tasks, mending, record-keeping, reading, at lower total consumption. A Claim family that had installed a lantern shelf the previous summer found themselves in a different situation than their neighbors. They moved all evening work to the table, directly under the shelf lamp. The bright, even light over the work surface meant they could accomplish mending, harness repair, and account balancing in 2 to 3 hours that might have required 4 hours with a table lamp. The lamp burned during those hours at a reduced wick setting, about 7/10 ounce per hour instead of 1 ounce per hour. Total nightly consumption ran about 1.5 to 2 ounces instead of 4 to 5 ounces. The family still cut some lamp hours. They retired earlier, skipped reading on some nights, and moved minor tasks to midday when possible. But they preserved productive evening work. A town family that had relied on simple table lamps faced harsher choices. Cutting fuel use meant cutting hours almost 1-to-1. To reduce consumption by half, they had to halve lamp hours. Evening work that required good light simply stopped. Account books went unbalanced for weeks. Mending piled up. Children's reading lessons ceased. Comparative schedules through a 2-month supply gap illustrate the difference. Both families start with a remaining stock of 4 gallons in mid-January. The railroad is not expected to resume service for at least 8 weeks, possibly longer. Strategy: a household burning at baseline rates with 50% hour cuts, 2.5 ounces nightly, 47 ounces per month, depletes 4 gallons in about 68 days, just barely, reaching the hoped-for resumption date. Strategy B household, burning at optimized rates with 25% hour cuts, 1.5 ounces nightly, 45 ounces per month, depletes 4 gallons in approximately 113 days, nearly 4 months, providing comfortable margin even if trains are delayed beyond initial estimates. The difference was not trivial. Strategy A, households lived in near constant darkness, rationing every minute of light, postponing essential tasks, and praying the trains resumed before the oil ran out. Strategy B, households maintained modest evening routines, kept up with critical work, and had reserves for genuine emergencies, medical needs, livestock crises, unexpected visitors requiring shelter. Diary lines from the period note the psychological weight. "We did without the lamp on some nights, waiting in the dark," versus "worked later by the good lamp when there was mending to be done." The first record's deprivation, the second record's adaptation. In the same storm, one cabin went dark and waited. Another kept a narrow island of clear light on the table and stretched its last barrel into spring. A mail-order catalog page from the mid-1880s lists kitchen wall lamp with enameled reflector at $2.75, side by side, with plain shelf brackets at 90 cents. The lamps feature curved reflectors, adjustable arms, and decorative enamel finishes. The brackets offer simple function, a board, iron supports, and the option to add a customer's own reflector. The evolution from improvised shelf to standard hardware took less than a decade. By the late 1880s, manufacturers and hardware distributors recognized a proven market. Farm households that had built crude lamp shelves from scrap were now ready to purchase refined versions. The geometry had been validated in the field. The demand existed. A hardware buyer for a general store choosing which wall lamps to stock compared features and prices. Reflector diameter, finish quality, and ease of installation drove decisions. Catalogs provided detailed specifications, reflector curves designed for maximum forward throw, polished tin or enameled surfaces, mounting hardware included. The factory versions mirrored the homemade shelves in essential geometry. Heights remained similar, 5 to 6 feet above floor, placing the flame at optimal working height. Reflectors remained the core feature, curved metal surfaces capturing backward light and redirecting it forward. Hoods appeared on premium models, projecting 4 to 6 inches above the lamp to limit ceiling waste. But the manufactured products added refinements. Reflectors were pressed to consistent curves rather than hand-hammered. Enamel finishes resisted tarnish and cleaned easily. Adjustable arms allowed users to position lamps precisely for different tasks. Wall plates distributed mounting stress, preventing damage to plaster or board walls. Farm. Households replacing homemade shelves with manufactured wall brackets reported satisfaction. The new fixtures were easier to clean, more durable, and often brighter due to superior reflector finishes. But the core improvement, better light distribution per unit fuel, remained identical to what the improvised versions had delivered. Photographed farm kitchens and pantries from the late 1880s and 1890s show rising penetration of wall-mounted lamps. Estate inventories listing household goods begin including wall bracket lamp alongside traditional table lamps. The item had moved from oddity to standard equipment. Catalog copy reveals manufacturers' understanding of the market. Descriptions promised excellent light on sink or table with economical consumption of oil, or bright illumination for fine work, saves fuel compared to table lamps. These claims were testable and accurate. The hardware delivered measurable benefit. Pricing reflected accessibility. A complete wall lamp with reflector cost $2 to $3, roughly 1 month's lamp oil savings for a household that had upgraded from table lamps to wall fixtures. The payback period was short enough to justify purchase even for families on tight budgets. Simpler brackets without lamps cost under $1, allowing families to use existing lamps with improved geometry. The spread of wall lamps into frontier households represented the diffusion of an innovation that had begun as local experimentation, been validated through hard testing during supply interruptions, and finally scaled through commercial production. The manufacturers did not invent the principle. They codified and refined what field improvisers had already discovered, that reflectors and elevation yielded measurable fuel savings and better task lighting. The fool's shelf, mocked initially as wasteful complexity, was now stamped in steel and shipped by the crate. The arithmetic had been proven too many times to ignore. What began as an odd board on a cabin wall was now stamped in steel and shipped by the crate. A modern 12-volt cabin with LED strips mounted high and angled reflectors over a workbench demonstrates the same geometry that improved frontier kerosene lamps. The fuel changed from carbon-based combustion to electrical current. The source changed from open flame to solid-state semiconductor. The basic principles of efficient distribution remained identical. Off-grid cabins and workshops in the 21st century face similar constraints to frontier homesteads in the 19th century. Limited energy supply, high value placed on efficiency, need to maximize useful light per unit of input power. The solutions converge on the same core ideas. Combustion sources, kerosene, candles, gas mantles, have low luminous efficacy. Most energy releases as heat rather than visible light. Electric sources improved efficiency dramatically, but the distribution problem persists. A bare bulb or LED strip wastes significant light upward and sideways. Proper geometry reclaims what would otherwise be lost. Reflective surfaces and elevation increase task plane illuminance in modern systems exactly as they did in kerosene systems. Aluminum shades behind LED strips redirect light downward and forward. Parabolic reflectors focus light into tight beams for precision work. Task lights mount above and behind the work, avoiding glare and shadows. Hoods and shades reduce waste and glare in contemporary fixtures, just as they did in 19th century lamps. A shielded LED work light throws a clean oval onto the bench while preventing spill light from entering the operator's eyes or illuminating irrelevant areas. Early 20th century lighting guides formalized these principles in engineering terms. Illuminating Engineering Society standards specified reflector types, surface finishes, and mounting heights for maximum efficiency in industrial and commercial settings. The recommendations derived from photometric measurements and optimization studies, but they echoed lessons learned through trial and error on the frontier. The parallel extends to modern off-grid living. A present-day homesteader calculating amp hours from solar panels and batteries faces the same trade-offs as a frontier farmer calculating gallons from kerosene barrels. Limited supply demands efficient use. Design that wastes energy forces behavioral rationing. Design that optimizes distribution preserves functionality within constraints. Contemporary off-grid forums and guides recommend elevated task lighting with reflectors as standard practice. The advice is functionally identical to frontier farm paper columns that suggested lamp shelves and tin backplates. The unit of account changed from ounces of kerosene to watt-hours of electricity, but the logic remained constant. Fluorescent strips in workshops, adjustable task lights over desks, directional LED fixtures in kitchens, all follow design rules that predate electric lighting. Manufacturers optimize reflector curves and mounting geometry to extract maximum illumination from minimum input power. The improvements are incremental, better materials, more precise engineering, but the core principle is unchanged. The fuel changed, the wiring changed, but the rule did not. Light only helps where it lands. A brittle ledger page noting oil 2 gallons for January in the same ink as seed oats and plow repair serves as the sole documentary evidence of an efficiency improvement. The page records purchases and quantities, not reasons or methods. The family that kept this ledger never wrote an explanation of why their oil use dropped. They simply recorded the fact that it did. The contrast between assumption and outcome appears in the numbers alone. Small efficiencies, considered trivia in comfortable circumstances, compound into survival differences on tight margins. On a frontier where 3 to 4% of household income went to illumination, a 1/3 reduction in fuel consumption freed meaningful capital. Aggregate the seasonal savings across 3 hard winters. A family that saves 1 gallon per winter month avoids buying 9 to 12 gallons total. At 15 to 25 cents per gallon, that sum ranges from $1.35 to $3, enough for a replacement tool, extra livestock feed, or a crucial repair that might otherwise be deferred. Place lighting within documented economic contexts. Historical household budget studies from the late 19th century, compiled from farm journals and settlement reports, estimate that illumination consumed 2.5% to 4% of working-class and frontier family expenditure. For a household with annual cash income of $200 to $300, lighting costs ran $6 to $12 yearly. A sustained one-third reduction, achieved through geometric design rather than behavioral deprivation, saved $2 to $4 annually. That sum represented 1 to 2 weeks of unskilled labor wages in the period. It purchased 50 pounds of flour, 2 boxes of cartridges, or most of a replacement plowshare. The benefit extended beyond direct cash savings. Reduced kerosene consumption meant fewer trips to town during winter, lowering exposure to dangerous travel in storms. Lower baseline usage provided a buffer during supply interruptions, extending available stock by weeks or months. Families that had optimized their lighting faced less severe choices during crises. The ledger page records only the outcome: thinner oil columns, steady expenditure on other necessities, work still finished by lamplight. The methodology, a board, a tin plate, a hood, and disciplined placement, appears nowhere in the accounts. The family had no reason to document what became routine practice. Other households kept similar records. Store ledgers from frontier towns show declining per-household kerosene purchases through the late 1880s and 1890s, even as population and economic activity increased. The decline corresponds to the spread of wall lamps, reflector fixtures, and better lighting practice. No dramatic announcements marked the change. No published studies quantified the savings at the time. The improvement spread quietly through demonstration and adoption. Families saw neighbors' wall lamps and asked how to build similar fixtures. Hardware stores stocked reflector brackets and sold steady quantities. The practice normalized without fanfare. They did not tell stories about the lantern shelf. The only record is a thinner oil column in the ledger, and work still finished by lamplight. If you value documented frontier engineering and the quiet ways small design changes shifted survival math, consider supporting the channel so more of these builds can be researched and explained.